Aizen's ultimate goal was to acquire the Oken, otherwise known as the King's Key, and use it to invade the royal palace and kill the Soul King, usurping the throne of heaven. Of course, he never really got anywhere close, being defeated by Ichigo and sealed by Urahara before he could even make the key. And so we'll never truly know how his attempt at conquest would have gone, but that doesn't mean we can't speculate. What we do know, however, is that in order to get to the Soul King, Aizen would have first had to go through the Royal Guard, the Zero Division. Although we knew of the existence of the elusive Zero Division for years before Aizen's eventual defeat, it wouldn't be until after Aizen was imprisoned that we'd finally meet them for the first time in person, in the wake of the Vandenreich's devastating initial invasion. And so the two sides never actually crossed paths. Back in 2020, I made my first ever Bleach What If video, which posed a simple question. What if Aizen had made it to the Royal Palace and fought the Zero Division? Would he have defeated them and succeeded in his goal, or, based on what very little we knew of these characters at the time, thanks to their overall poor showing in the Thousand Year Blood War arc manga, could they have successfully defended the palace and repelled Aizen's assault? 5 years ago, it was a fun discussion to have, but the truth is we really didn't know enough to warrant an answer, a definitive one at least. However, things are very different now here in 2025. Thanks to the Thousand Year Blood War arc anime, we know considerably more about the capabilities of the Zero Division as a group, supposedly stronger than the entire Gotei 13 combined than we did back then. And so today, I want to revisit the first ever What If video on the channel, armed with our new knowledge, and come to a more definitive conclusion. If Aizen ascended to the Royal Palace and fought the Zero Division, could he defeat them, or does he still not stand a chance? Let's take a look. Before we get started on today's video, guys, as always, if you enjoyed it, consider hitting subscribe down below, and if you really enjoyed it, maybe consider hitting that new hype button as well, as I think it helps to spread the word of the video somewhat and help it to reach more people, which would be a massive help. And as I mentioned in my last upload, I have just reworked my games channel somewhat, and I'm hoping to do weekly uploads over there of a kind of content that's simply more satisfying, more engaging, and more compelling, both for me to create and hopefully for you to enjoy as well. So if you haven't yet had the chance to go over there and check out that channel either, please consider doing so today. I really would appreciate the support. So the premise is pretty simple. Aizen manages to reach the Royal Palace and faces off against the Zero Division. There are a few things that we need to consider before any fighting even takes place, however. First of all, in what manner does he arrive? Depending on what's happened in the story, well, the situation might be different. For example, at what stage of his Hogyoku evolution is Aizen at? Because here's the thing, I don't envision a world where Gin doesn't betray him before he completes the key. Gin's entire path has led to this, and he's not about to let Aizen achieve his goal, so I'm assuming Gin attempts to kill Aizen no matter what, and triggers his transformation into Butterfly Aizen no matter what. The question is, what happens next? Because there's really only two outcomes if we actually want Aizen to reach the palace. Either Ichigo doesn't learn the final Getsuga Tensho in time, and Aizen wipes out Karakura Town to create the Oken, or Ichigo returns from his training, pushes Aizen to transform again, as we see in the manga, this time into his monstrous eldritch final form, but this time Aizen defeats him before going on to wipe out Karakura Town and create the Oken. If Ichigo manages to pull off the final Getsuga Tensho, then that sets into motion the same chain reaction of events that bring about the end of the Arrancar arc. Aizen gets sealed by Kisuke, and the canon story plays out, so we can't let it get that far. So the difference is really down to between whether we are dealing with Butterfly Aizen or Monster Aizen by the time he gets to the palace. Yet here's the kicker. I don't really think it makes much of a difference at all. Sure, Monster Aizen unleashes some pretty devastating attacks that aren't possible as Butterfly Aizen, such as his Fragor ability, which instantly levels a space the size of a town, and was able to damage Bankai Ichigo, albeit superficially, but I think once you reach this level of power, depending on the caliber of your enemies, difference is ultimately negligible. So for the purposes of this video, I'm going to at least start by saying that Aizen arrives in the royal palace in his butterfly form, because then that also leaves us with some options. Who's to say the Zero Division aren't also capable of forcing him to transform again like Ichigo did, and so we very well may see that play out. But there's one other thing to consider as well, one that I didn't think of last time, and one that's ultimately too nebulous to really discuss beyond initial speculation, but if Aizen succeeded in creating the Oken in order to reach the royal palace, doesn't that mean he quite literally brings someone into being? As Ichibei and Senjumaru would later tell Ichigo, Aizen was attempting to quite literally create a Zero Division member. He was trying to create life, adding even further to his idea of becoming God, making it even more literal. Of course, this is perhaps one of the series' most overt retcons. Clearly, back in the Arankar arc days, the Oken was in fact a physical key, whose location was apparently passed down verbally between Captain Commanders of the Gotei 13, again, despite the fact that Yamamoto was later revealed to be the only Captain Commander to date. So I guess what Yamamoto said was technically true from a certain point of view, it was just that he hadn't actually passed it down to anyone yet. I wonder if Kyoraku now also knows the secret. But anyway, what I'm getting at is, if Aizen succeeded in creating a possible Zero Division member, what would that even look like in the moment? Would they serve him? How does sacrificing Karakura Town result in the creation of a soul? With the Oken baked into its bones, it's possible that it means Aizen was trying to infuse his own bones with the power of the Oken, as the current Zero Division all have as well. But that, at least according to the Thousand Year Blood War arc, seems to be a power reserved only for the Soul King. And also, Senjumaru literally says he was trying to create life, which would imply an all-new being, separate from both himself and the existing Zero Division members. Like I said, there is nothing to go on here, but I thought it was interesting all the same. Would Aizen be entering the royal palace with a Zero Division caliber soul by his side who would likely do his bidding? Perhaps. So in that original video from 2020, I came to the conclusion that thanks to Aizen's transcendent power, he would be able to brute force his way through the vast majority of the Zero Division. It was difficult to determine how certain scenarios might play out, such as whether or not Hikefune's Cage of Life could contain Aizen's Kurohitsugi or not, but either way, considering we knew virtually nothing about what the individual Zero Division members could actually do back then, I figured Aizen would eventually have them beat. The only real question came, unsurprisingly, in the form of Ichibei, who was also the only Zero Division member at the time about whom we knew essentially everything he was capable of. And in that video, I theorized that the fight between Ichibei and Aizen would be very similar to the one between Ichibei and Yhwach arc that plays out in the manga, in that Ichibei, in terms of raw power and skill, likely has Aizen beat, and if he fought Aizen with the same unrelenting ferocity and determination to kill that he eventually did Yhwach, I didn't think Aizen would stand much of a chance. But of course the crux of the argument was that Aizen, like Yhwach, is simply playing a waiting game. Ichibei was tossing Yhwach around like a rag doll, and even stripped him of his name before granting him a new one with his Bankai, but none of that mattered once Yhwach's almighty activated. At that point, reason seemed to go out the window, as Yhwach's new name was revoked, and he somehow restored all of his powers in one fell swoop. In the video, I argued the same was likely true of Aizen, that he would simply keep evolving thanks to the Hogyoku until he reached a point where he could just overwhelm Ichibei. And let's not forget that by the time Aizen emerged from his cocoon, he was truly transcendent. His power had begun to defy reason itself, as seen when he obliterates Kototsu in the Dangai by simply doing nothing. Kototsu is a very unusual entity in the world of Bleach, in that it's not a being of Reiatsu, but one of reason, as Gin notes. It is more a force of nature than anything actually living, and that as it controls space-time itself, it can't be hurt or interacted with using Reiatsu. Yet Aizen's mere presence destroys it anyway. The entire point of this sequence in the manga is to show us that Aizen's newfound power no longer conforms to reality as we should expect it. The same as the characters around Aizen should expect it as well. Reason no longer applies here, and so there's no reason to believe that Aizen's power, or maybe more accurately the Hogyoku's power, couldn't also counteract Ichibe's in a similar way, to the point where reason doesn't apply. In the end, I concluded by saying that I thought Aizen would eventually defeat the Zero Division, but those were very different times. So let's take a brief look at what we now know the Zero Division can do thanks to the Thousand Year Blood War arc anime that we didn't know before. First things first, let's get a couple of these guys out of the way quickly. Our knowledge of the capabilities of Ichibei, Hyosobe, and Oetsu Nimaya remains pretty much unchanged, despite the anime's additions. Where Ichibei is concerned, that's not really a big deal, considering the manga already gave us pretty much everything. His Shikai, his Bankai, his Hakuda prowess, his Kido mastery, his speed, all of that was revealed in the manga, and it is as amazing as you'd expect. He was the only member of the Zero Division to get a true fight, and it shows. So the anime didn't really need to give him anything new, anything else. However, Oetsu perhaps deserved a little more. Yes, he still effortlessly blitzes the Schutzstaffel and later goes toe-to-toe with the resurrected Leal, dodging the X-axis without a care in the world. Which is a tad funny considering Leal would later go on to tell Kyoraku that dodging means nothing in the face of his ability. Perhaps then this really is a testament to how absurdly fast Oetsu actually is. Sadly though, that is all the God of the Sword received from the anime's extension, since he's not using his actual Zanpakuto, if he even has one, and is instead wielding Sayafushi, the failed blade that kills in a single hit. There's nothing else for us to see there either. It's interesting though, the only reason Oetsu actually goes down here is because he gambled that Leal wouldn't shoot him for fear of hitting Yhwach, critically misunderstanding how the X-axis worked. If he hadn't attempted that, would he have still been able to get in close enough to land a strike? We see earlier in their fight that he does in fact manage it, and of course his blade simply phases through Leal. So I can't help but wonder if Oetsu would have been able to force Leal to open his second eye and activate Volstendish simply thanks to his incredible speed and dexterity, so long as he kept closing the gap on him, which again makes sense, considering Leal is almost an exclusively at-range fighter. Either way, at the end of the day, Ichibei and Oetsu didn't really benefit from the anime fight extension in any notable way. Kiryu Hikifune is a little stranger, as she kind of falls into the middle somewhere. Nothing concrete was revealed about her Zanpakuto for the most part, though we were given a small insight into how her powers can work out in the field. We already knew from the manga that Hikifune's Reryoku has the power to breed life, essentially, to help things grow and to flourish, to embolden things by implanting new, more powerful and changed spirit energy into them, the essence of the Gikon and the Mod Soul. And we do kind of see that in full force during her duel with Pernida. In that fight, Hikifune freely wields her oversized spoon and tosses several seeds into the air before wafting presumably her power into them with her Zanpakuto, causing them to sprout and grow immediately. And this seems to be her primary method of attack when battling Pernida, as the seeds become powerful vines and roots that erupt towards the Sternritter in an attempt to bind it. Hikifune is also seen expending all of her stored-up Reryoku to trap Pernida inside a huge tree, but Pernida is capable of breaking free. More than that, though, we see that Hikifune is able to consistently manage and repair the Cage of Life, even after it's broken in two by the likes of Hashwolf's The Balance, though it does seem like maintaining the cage effectively prevents her from fighting at all in that first round. Once the second round commences, though, Hikifune rebuilds the cage after it was obliterated by Yhwach's Owl's Valen, and in doing so creates a new cage that entombs the fighters completely, even going so far as to block out the light. So yeah, like I said, Hikifune is a weird one. She's simply not as straightforward as the other Zero Division members, and is almost certainly going to play more of a supporting role in the battle against Aizen. But that now leaves us with the two remaining Zero Division members, those who received the most significant new additions as a result of the anime's changes. Up first is Korinji Tenjiro, who got an incredible and unexpected upgrade in the anime. During the initial round of fighting, Tenjiro battles Hashwolf using his Kinpika and quickly overcomes the Sternritter Grand Master, even bringing his Shikai down upon Hashwolf's front shield over and over. Eventually, Tenjiro outmaneuvers Hashwolf and relieves him of the shield, before the two of them clash, with Tenjiro emerging victorious in what seemed like a decisive and frankly pretty effortless win. To say this was one of the biggest upsets, one of the biggest surprises of the extended anime fight would be an understatement. Before we went into the finale of Core 2, a lot of people had written Tenjiro off as one of the weaker members of the group alongside Hikifune, even though we hadn't really seen that much, but the anime, I think, totally changed that. And then, of course, there's Shutara Senjumaru, in many ways still the crown jewel of anime-exclusive content in the Thousand Year Blood War arc. While she defeats Nyanzol Wyzol with her Shikai in the manga, we didn't know it was her Shikai. As far as we were concerned, she could have simply been using her sewing skills to weave his demise. But no, it was in fact her Shikai, Shigarami, which is fully explored here in the anime. Its ability is simple, but extremely powerful. In Shikai, Shigarami takes the form of a sewing needle, and a thin thread of reishi is constantly flowing through it. Using this thread, Senjumaru is capable of weaving virtually anything into being. Whether it's a fake version of herself to use as a decoy, a parasol that can catch and reflect Quincy arrows, or even the false scenery surrounding them in the palace. In fact, Senjumaru's multiple golden arms are used to facilitate the creation abilities of her Shikai, and we even see her use it to tie down Gerard Valkyrie. But beyond that, Senjumaru is given by far the biggest reveal of them all, the most consequential. Her Bankai, Shatatsu Karagara Shigarami no Suji, which she can only release once Oetsu, Tenjiro, and Hikifune have killed themselves in order to break the Blood Oath seal. The idea of the Blood Oath seal is completely new for the anime and makes the Zero Division feel truly godly. The point of the seal being that if any of the four of them were to freely use their true power, it would be enough to potentially destabilize the very worlds of the Bleach universe, as seen when Senjumaru activates her Bankai, a force that is felt throughout the human world, the Soul Society, and Waco Mundo too. We had no idea this even existed back when I made my original video in 2020, so this adds a completely new layer to the proceedings. On top of that, Senjumaru's Bankai is extremely strong itself, as she imprisons her target in a special realm made up of tan mono fabrics, within which she effectively controls reality itself. There, Senjumaru confronts her targets with their ultimate fate, and uses it to seal them away, weaving their fate into the very fabric itself. So, while her Bankai seemingly doesn't kill her enemies, it was enough to hold hostage all 6 of the strongest Sternritter at once, until Yhwach's reawakening of the Almighty rescued them. And let me tell you, Yhwach does a lot of bailing out when it comes to the Schutzstaffel in this battle against the Zero Division. And so that leaves us with a very changed landscape sprawling out before us. Back in 2020, Aizen had a much easier time of it. Since we knew virtually nothing about the Zero Division, it was easy to hand-wave them away and say that, well, Aizen could probably just overpower them on his own. But is that really the case now? Well, that brings us nicely to the main event. Could Aizen actually defeat the Zero Division now, based on everything we know? Let's imagine Aizen has created the Oken, and succeeded in entering the royal palace, arriving, most likely in his butterflies and form. The very first question we need to ask is this: Are any of the Zero Division transcendent? Now, the truth is we don't know. We've really got no idea, because Kubo kind of dropped the concept of transcendence almost as quickly as he introduced it, pretty much as soon as the Arrancar arc came to an end. And while we don't really have any reason to believe that they are, specifically, instead representing the pinnacle of what pure Shinigami can become, I also don't think it is as clear-cut as that. For example, Ichibei, and perhaps even Oetsu too, predate the typical idea of what a Shinigami even is, especially if you've read Can't Fear Your Own World. But even more importantly than that, what's most likely to make them transcendent, at least in my opinion, is their close affiliation to none other than the Soul King himself. We saw that while Yhwach likely wasn't initially a transcendent being, at least in the sense that we've come to know, simply being an all-powerful Quincy, him absorbing his father's power to become the new Soul King essentially made him one who transcends the usual boundaries, with the strength now to even collapse the three worlds back into one again, and frankly anyone who can do that should almost certainly be considered transcendent. And hell, even then, Yhwach wasn't actually capable of taking in all of Adnias' power either. While the Zero Division members haven't absorbed a vast quantity of Adnias' strength in that way, he has imparted upon them a portion of his power, both to transform them into Oken, meaning their makeup is already vastly different from a normal Shinigami anyway, but also to grant them special divine abilities, connections to the inventions that secured them a place within the Zero Division to begin with, innate abilities that normal Shinigami simply don't have. I guess what I'm getting at is, even if the Zero Division members are ultimately just Shinigami, they aren't just Shinigami, if you get what I mean. They are special Shinigami at the very least, with strange godly powers that eclipse anything possible with normal Shinigami. For example, Oetsu is able to communicate with Shinigami while they are inside their inner world, and he can know and control all Asauchi, bending them to his will. Tenjiro can seemingly freely control water, something that doesn't seem to have anything to do with his Zanpakuto and is instead connected to his invention. Hikifune can literally give life to things with her spirit energy, and we see her growing a plant out of her hand. And of course, Ichibei's godly powers are obvious. Even his very name is cursed, and those unworthy of saying it, which is essentially everyone unless he specifically allows them, need to refer to him by a title instead, usually Osho, lest they completely lose the ability to speak, as we saw with Yhwach. These aren't Shinigami powers. They are something else, something that transcends Shinigami. But at this point, Aizen has also transcended the normal boundaries too. He has transgressed, he has evolved, and that can't be ignored. Like I said earlier, his power has transgressed the bounds of reason itself, to the point where he can annihilate Kototsu like it's nothing. His mere presence erodes human souls, though it can feel like there's a bit of an inconsistency with this. Aizen is seen killing ordinary humans by simply walking beside them, which is fine, and he later tells Don Kanoji that a human who comes into direct contact with him will be killed. Again, that lines up, but in a different instance, as he approaches Tatsuki and he's still some way away from her, he commends her for being able to retain her form, even though she shouldn't lose her form until they actually get right next to each other. By his own words and examples, she shouldn't be affected in a damaging way until he's literally right beside her or even touching her. And obviously, as seen later, Aizen, even after having transformed again, is able to clash with Gin at close range without totally eradicating his body, though it could simply be that Aizen is lowering his power at this point, as he notes later on. And then of course there's Aizen's ultimate ace in the hole, the Hogyoku, the most unpredictable, unknown variable in this entire fight, which, as he notes during his battle with Urahara, Yoruichi and Isshin, not only did it replace his spirit entirely, but it was transforming his body and enhancing all of his powers, even though they were already unrivaled by the majority of the Soul Society. Even as early as prior to his chrysalis form completely taking shape, Aizen's body had grown so immensely strong that he was capable of surviving a Hado 91 without any real defense, and could carve through Kisuke's shoulder with his bare hand. Yes, Aizen is growing reckless here, but as he himself notes, he doesn't have a reason to worry anymore, and the proof is in the pudding. He's now capable of surviving being struck by a level 90s Kido without it really doing anything to him. So that's the kind of power that we're dealing with here. Plus, so long as Aizen keeps his mind focused on his goal, it seems like the Hogyoku is ready and willing to force evolutions on him every time he dies, as we see multiple times throughout Deicide. I do wonder though, is there a point where Aizen's evolution would naturally come to a stop? I'm not saying the Hogyoku runs out of juice per se, but what if Aizen maxes out on his potential? Even as a transcendent being, surely there is a ceiling. Anyway, Aizen arrives and immediately draws the attention of the Zero Division. Again, whether they can even sense him or not, I don't know, but I think Aizen is egotistical enough to actively want to bring them to him. Regardless, the Zero Division arrive on the scene. Remember as well that this time it is 5 against 1, as opposed to 5 against Yhwach and his entire Royal Guard. Every single member of the Zero Division now has their eyes fixed upon Aizen, and I'll be honest, this does have a material effect. However, if we remove Ichibei from the equation briefly, as he's always going to be the hardest one to figure out, I have to say that I think this version of Aizen is almost certainly stronger than each of the individual Zero Division members, because I think he's stronger than the Schutzstaffel members too. Whether he can kill the Schutzstaffel members, such as Leal or Gerard, is another thing entirely, considering how weird they are and how they seem designed to be immortal. From what we see, Gerard isn't that great of a fighter, really. He gets killed numerous times in his battle, but he keeps coming back anyway because it's just baked into his ability. So I do think it would be safe to say that Aizen would be stronger than them, for sure, even if he couldn't necessarily kill them. Plus, Aizen is most famous for having an absurd amount of spirit energy. Even prior to fusing with the Hogyoku, he had twice the spirit energy of a captain, and it's only been bolstered since then. It's kind of funny, Aizen's just one guy, but it does feel like he's given himself all the advantages he can that he could possibly have in preparation for this battle, empowering himself massively before his assault on the palace, which, I mean, I guess was the point, right? Anyway, if we break it down by Zero Division member, I mean, what can any of them really do to stop him, even with all of this new information? Say Aizen arrives on the palace walkway, and is immediately intercepted by the entire gang, sans maybe Ichibei for now, and Hikifune erects the Cage of Life around him. Let's revisit that scenario I introduced in my 2020 video. Perhaps Aizen tries to annihilate the cage with his fully powered Hado 90 Kurohitsugi. Would it even work? According to Aizen, a fully powered Kurohitsugi has the ability to distort space and time, which makes me think it could circumvent the Cage of Life's power to essentially eat Reiatsu, but the truth is we don't really know what Kurohitsugi's ability to distort space and time really means. All it's ever really done is blow things up. And by the way, it only affects that which it surrounds, that which it encases. If the black coffin is unable to escape and surround the Cage of Life, I don't think it's going to achieve anything at all. After all, the Cage of Life continuously devours Reiatsu to help it grow, and we saw even lightning-fast attacks like Leal's X-axis were unable to escape it. So, would Kurohitsugi, which is a reishi construct, essentially stand a chance at all, or would it be swallowed up, perhaps even empowering the cage further? Interestingly, I think Hikifune, like I said, might be one of the more useful members of the Zero Division in this fight, playing a more supportive role. Not only is she likely to remain at range, but she can attempt to lock Aizen down with her roots and vines. Though it's hard to say what would happen to those when they got close enough to him to come into contact. Would they just be instantly erased? Things get a little trickier when we look at the Zero Division members who are going to be going toe-to-toe with Aizen himself. Likely Tenjiro and Oetsu, at least initially. If Oetsu brings Sayafushi to the fight again, he can attempt to blitz Aizen with sheer speed, and I have to imagine that Sayafushi would connect, right? I mean, prior to his butterfly transformation, Aizen wasn't so unbelievably untouchable and powerful, because we saw that Gin was able to use his Bankai against him, and very successfully at that. And the answer's pretty simple. Sure, normal humans break down in Aizen's vicinity, but that simply isn't the case when it comes to powerful Shinigami. So I don't think there's anything actively stopping characters like Oetsu and Tenjiro from closing the gap and connecting even once Aizen is in this form. But of course the same is absolutely true going in the opposite direction as well. And considering the Zero Division members are pretty handily taken down by the resurrected Schutzstaffel in the anime, I think it's fairly safe to say that at least Oetsu, Tenjiro, Senjumaru, and Hikifune could probably be defeated in 1 to 2 hits by this version of Aizen. I mean, this is a version of Aizen that has been powered up multiple times over a version of Aizen who was already taking out Gotei 13 captains with 1 hit apiece. I think sometimes with the advent of the 1000-Year Blood War arc, it can be easy to forget certain apexes of power, and Aizen was one of them, and remains one of them. Even Arrancar arc Aizen going up against the Zero Division is a force to be reckoned with. Butterflies, who is evolved 3 times over that version of Aizen, who was taking out characters like Kyoraku and Shinji in a single sword strike, is gonna be able to do the same thing to the Zero Division. Anyway, going back to Oetsu, the real question is whether or not Sayafushi would even work on Aizen, or has he become so powerful that he could simply try and block the blade himself, if not with his bare hand, then at least with his own sword? I can totally imagine a scenario where Oetsu speed blitzes Aizen and appears right beside him with Sayafushi, telling Aizen that his sword is 1 hit, 1 kill, and brings it in towards the villain, only for Aizen to simply catch it in his iconic way, horrifying Oetsu. And I think this is quite likely too. Sayafushi isn't a Reiatsu-based ability. It's a physical object. It simply works the way it does. It's only as effective as it is because of how sharp it is. There's nothing else to it. If Aizen's body is now hard enough to the point where that might not be a guarantee, then Oetsu is in trouble. Don't forget as well that even if Oetsu was moving incredibly fast, once he's transformed to this state, which is maybe arguably his first truly transcendent version, as Aizen himself thanks Gin for helping him to transcend Hollows and Shinigamis, Aizen can now actually teleport, as in his entire body breaks down and reappears elsewhere, and I'm fairly sure the manga highlights the fact that Ichigo can't sense Aizen while this is happening, which makes sense. This isn't Shunpo, he isn't still physically present. Instead, he is breaking down and reappearing elsewhere. It is literal reconstitution, teleportation, and he seems to be undetectable while this is happening. And then, what about Tenjiro? Sure, his newfound showing in the anime was really impressive. No one's doubting that. But I'm also not operating under any delusions either. Well, maybe I am, but not here, I don't think. That version of Hashwolf is almost certainly nowhere near as powerful as a transcendent Aizen. Especially prior, by the way, to being resurrected and later empowered by Yuha, absolutely broken shrift or not. It's interesting too, Tenjiro must defeat and kill Hashwolf so quickly that the balance doesn't even get the chance to activate, as we know he's able to use it, and effectively too, prior to his resurrection, since he uses it to break the cage of life in half earlier in that very same episode. So I've got to be honest, I'm not sure exactly what Tenjiro is going to do against Aizen in close quarters. Both he and Oetsu are lightning fast, and both of them have shown the ability to cut down absurdly powerful enemies in just a single hit. But again, I think Aizen more than outpaces the Schutzstaffel at this stage in the game anyway, on an individual basis. As for Kinpika, well, I imagine Aizen's eyes would be just as affected by the initial burst of light as anyone else, but I mean, aside from that, What is Tenjiro likely to accomplish with it? He's an incredibly skilled swordsman. We see that in how quickly he disarms Hashwolf, but first of all, Aizen's sword is currently fused to his arm, so good luck disarming him. And secondly, I just don't see the Zero Division members engaging Aizen like that up close and personal. It's too risky. Though, then again, I mean, having said that, when Oetsu was preparing to face Yuha, and I'm pretty sure this wasn't in the anime, in the manga he thinks to himself that while he won't be able to take Yuha down in a single hit, he'll start by cutting his arms off, which still seems pretty confident to me. What's to say the Zero Division wouldn't also feel so smugly about encountering Aizen too? Again, his transcendent nature might give them pause, but maybe it also wouldn't. Instead, maybe we see Oetsu and Tenjiro working together in a similar manner to how they fought Askin. Oetsu gets in close and takes the risk, while also trying to land a critical strike with Sayafushi, but backs out and lets Tenjiro's blood hell pond water wash over him to restore his health when he needs it. Also, considering, like I said earlier, that Aizen is the only target, we have to take into account the fact that the supporting players here will also be a factor. What's to say if Aizen isn't actively going after the Cage of Life, Hikifune doesn't play a more active role, and instead she could potentially be waiting on the sidelines, perhaps to heal, or maybe even bolster, or further enhance and strengthen both Oetsu and Tenjiro's current spirit energy, implanting new spirit energy into them on the go, the same way Tenjiro utilizes his invention to help Oetsu in the battle against Askin. Let's also not forget that the anime revealed that Senjumaru is capable of instantly healing otherwise fatal injuries, which honestly feels like it's gone overlooked and is one of the craziest reveals to me. Like, Oetsu is basically a dead man. His heart has been practically blown out. I mean, Leal possibly missed it a bit by kind of going directly in the middle, but even so, I'm pretty sure the impression is supposed to be that Oetsu is screwed at that point, and Senjumaru just heals him back to normal like it's nothing. Like, it takes a fraction of a second. Why this technology, this healing wool, hasn't been passed down to the Seirete, I don't know, because it seems invaluable. That healing wool, that's worthy of getting into the Zero Division on its own, to be totally honest. Speaking of Senjumaru, well, she's definitely an interesting one. Look, despite her Shikai being very impressive, I can't see it helping all that much here. Whatever Senjumaru concocts isn't likely to hold Aizen for long. When she pinned Gerard down during their fight, he quickly broke free with nothing but his physical strength. At best, she might be able to trick Aizen with a decoy doll, or even utilizing the fabric scenery to enable Oetsu or Tenjiro to get the drop on Aizen and start the fight, but that's really about it. I guess we don't really know the extent to which she's able to create things with her Shikai. For some reason, she's able to create a parasol that perfectly catches Uryu's arrows, and not only catches them, but launches them back at him as well, so maybe she can create a parasol that completely blocks Aizen's Kido. I've got absolutely no idea. Senjumaru's Bankai, on the other hand, is a different story entirely. The thing with the Blood Oath Seal is that it introduces a level of power that we've never really seen before. The fact that a Zero Division member unleashing their Bankai has the capability to threaten the stability of the worlds is absurd, when you think about it, when you really think about it, and alludes to them, as I said before, sharing in a portion of Reio's own power. From what we've seen, and admittedly it's not a lot, but from what we've seen, Aizen does not possess power that allows him to quite literally destabilize the worlds. To be honest, I have a slight issue with the Blood Oath Seal for this very reason. It seems completely out of whack. Don't get me wrong, it is awesome, and it's a clever, quick way of telling us that actually these guys are the real deal. They're on a level the likes of which you've never seen before, but arguably being capable of something like this when someone like Aizen seemingly isn't, unless you're going to turn around and tell me that when Aizen uses his Bankai, the worlds are also at risk as well. I don't know, it feels like they are on a different level to even someone like Aizen. And maybe that's the case, but I'm not sure it would play out like that were they to actually fight. Another thing that makes me think the idea behind the Blood Oath seal is cool, but the execution is a little half-baked, is that it doesn't seem to account for Ichibei at all, whose power should theoretically be much stronger than any of the individual Zero Division. Yet apparently, not only is he not part of this ritual, but also his Bankai doesn't seem to affect the worlds in any way. Which is why it's a little difficult to discuss. But this is also where Aizen's power, that supposedly goes against reason, comes into play. Sure, if Senjumaru activated Bankai even against a transcendent Aizen, it honestly seems like there is little he can do to avoid being trapped within the Fabric Realm. Even if he is on a different plane of power to her individually, I guess it's possible, but I don't think he is strong enough to outright negate her Bankai purely through Reiatsu, like he does, or his doppelganger does, to Suifon's Nigeki Kesatsu. So instead, he'd need another way out of this prison. I can imagine, for example, Aizen being faced with just a totally jet black tan mono, with zero light on it whatsoever, representing both Mugetsu, of course, but even his time in Muken, before being sealed away in said tapestry. However, the issue with these major Bleach villains is that they are often operating on a different wavelength entirely, in a way that often doesn't align with logic, as is actively pointed out in the series. In the same way, Yhwach was able to simply free his men once his true power activated, we know that Aizen is now capable of destroying reason-based beings like Kototsu simply by standing in front of them. So, what I'm getting at is, while it might seem like Senjumaru's Bankai should work on paper, it feels like there are plenty of avenues for Aizen to escape. If him being sealed results in him feeling fear, the same fear of being extinguished that he felt at the hands of Gin, who's to say the Hogyoku wouldn't just force that next transformation upon him and set him free? Or who's to say Aizen's mere power and presence wouldn't just destroy the Tan Mono the moment it tried to ensnare him? Much in the same way he destroyed the Kototsu. Again, it's very easy to imagine him smirking at Senjumaru as she looks on in horror as the fabric unravels before her eyes, and Aizen simply tells her that his power is no longer bound by reason. In my original video, I said that Ichibei would give Aizen the most trouble, but that eventually Aizen would win simply because he would keep evolving until it reached a point where Ichibei simply couldn't keep up. Now, while I think that might still be true, I don't think I was giving Ichibei nearly enough credit. For starters, what's stopping Ichibei from using Ichimonji to cover the Hogyoku in black ink? If you removed the Hogyoku's name, would it lose all of its power, much in the same way as when Ichibei splashed Yhwach's Quincy Cross? What would that mean for Aizen? Would Aizen instantly be stripped of all of the additional power he's gained as a result of the Hogyoku? Since Aizen and the Hogyoku are currently fused together as one, would that mean Aizen loses his power as well? It feels like a transcendent Aizen would probably be able to keep up with Ichibei physically, and on a Kido basis as well, but if I'm being totally honest, I don't see how Aizen defeats Ichibei without some kind of plot nonsense, the same as Yhwach. Again, I could totally see Ichibei covering Aizen in ink before using Senritsu Tensho to send Aizen hurtling back to Earth, seemingly robbed of his name and power, the battle seemingly over. However, as he falls, the Hogyoku, which again perhaps doesn't conform to reason, and therefore is somehow able to free itself or circumvent or undo Ichibei's power, rescues Aizen, emboldening him to return to the palace and fight on. It does feel like the only way Ichibei loses this battle is if Aizen is able to constantly overcome everything he throws at him. If Ichibei uses everything he has, his Shikai, his Bankai, Yet the Hogyoku enables Aizen to return time and time again, leaving Ichibei with little to no options left. But even then, Aizen doesn't have the Almighty, which is the single most broken ability in all of Bleach, even if his power now does defy reason, which is a deliberately vague term, by the way. There is no way for him to outright undo the effects of an ability before it's even happened. For example, if Ichibei is forced to use Futen Taisatsuryo against Aizen, I don't really see any reason for it to fail. Unless Aizen truly is so powerful at this point that his sheer Reiatsu is capable of shattering the mausoleum, but again, I doubt it. This is Ichibei we're talking about after all. The only reason, as far as we know, Futen Taisatsuryo failed against Yhwach is because the Almighty allowed him to basically kill Ichibei before it even happened, because he changed the future. Aizen can't do that. Hell, if he could, then the Zero Division have lost before the battle even begins. If Ichibei manages to pull off Futen Taisatsuryo and remove Aizen from the cycle of rebirth, well, it seems like Aizen is probably done for, Hogyoku or not. Look, ultimately the Zero Division each brings something different to the fight, and even with the Thousand Year Blood War Arc anime's additions, we still haven't seen everything they can do. Ichibei and Senjumaru are the only members to have used Bankai, for example. Even if it was a 4 or even 5-on-1 situation with each member doing something different, I think Aizen at this late stage of his fusion has means of overcoming them, even if it is just raw power. When Gin stole the Hogyoku, Aizen lashed out at him, and even though Gin was fast enough to dodge him, Aizen's fingers grazed Gin's forearm, and as we see later, that brief, fleeting touch resulted in a chunk of his arm being essentially erased from existence. The same thing would almost certainly happen to any of these Zero Division members, sans again maybe Ichibei, if they tried to get in close and touch Aizen. While Aizen's mere presence may not hurt them in the same way it can hurt a normal human, certainly him actively trying to touch them would. And again, even if, say, Senjumaru's Bankai or Ichibei's Shikai were capable of defeating butterflies, and as I've noted here, I think could happen, or at least they back him into a corner, well, there's always the next stage of evolution to contend with, and suddenly you get Monster Aizen, who's flinging around Fragor like there's no tomorrow, with maybe future forms to come too. Honestly, this might be one of the toughest calls I've ever had to make in a discussion on this channel. Even with the new information, it still comes down. I still think it's all about Aizen versus Ichibei. I just don't think the other characters are on this kind of level, individually, and as silly as it sounds, even if a Zero Division member's Bankai is on that level, I think Aizen has the shenanigans necessary to escape it, similar to Yhwach. All of this, by the way, is without even consulting Aizen's Zanpakuto Kyokusuigetsu, which is yet another potential ace in the hole, but only if Aizen cares to use it. The reason I haven't brought it up in this video is because, well, he doesn't care to use it by this stage, but maybe that would have to change here, maybe he'd be forced to. But we have to look at what we are presented with in the story. Even though he's outmatched by Ichigo at every turn, in their final battle, there is still no denying the sheer power of this form of Aizen. Once he's become butterflies and seemingly truly transcended, he's capable of transforming entire landscapes with just a swing of his sword. Sure, it was Ichigo's swing that carved a mountain in two, but let's not ignore the fact that Aizen's swings are also demolishing the entire wasteland around them as well. Getting down to brass tacks as we wrap up this video, I think this form of Aizen and beyond is, simply put, one of the strongest characters the series has ever seen. But then, so is Ichibei. And it's hard to know if Ichibei constitutes being transcendent or not, again because Kubo pretty much does away with the concept after the Arrancar arc. If Ichibei is really only a Shinigami, and that's very hard to believe, albeit the true apex of one, then I don't see how he can defeat Aizen, but again, I also don't believe that. Ichibei is so clearly more. Ultimately though, after a very hard-fought battle, certainly harder than it was last time, I still come away from this what-if scenario even 5 years on, thinking that Aizen will end up victorious. It might be a lot more difficult. Senjumaru's Bankai, for example, would likely force a transformation upon him. And I think Ichibei's power might do the exact same thing, really putting Aizen and the Hogyoku through their paces. But unless one of them is capable of dealing the same kind of damage as Mugetsu all at once, enough to activate that seal that Urahara has placed inside Aizen, I don't see how they stop this otherwise unstoppable force from eventually prevailing. Alright everyone, that's it for today's video. Another long one, I do apologise, but I do appreciate it if you've managed to make it all the way to the end here. I've been wanting to revisit Aizen versus the Zero Division for quite some time now, especially since we found out much more as of the Thousand Year Blood War arc anime, and I've seen a lot of people wanting this discussion to come back too, so I hope it was to your liking, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you took something of value away from it as well. Do let me know down in the comments below, based on what we now know, thanks to the Thousand Year Blood War arc anime, do you see Aizen defeating the Zero Division and succeeding in his ultimate goal of reaching and killing the Soul King, or do they now have the means to stop him and his Hogyoku transformations, his constant evolutions? I'd love to get your thoughts down in the comments below. Maybe there is something that I completely missed here. If that's the case, do let me know. I'd love to hear it. Alright everyone, as always, thank you again so very much for watching. Consider hitting subscribe down below if you enjoyed today's video, and also check out my other channel, Mr. Tomo Talks Games as well. Do show your support over there for the new videos. We've got another one coming out on Monday. I really would appreciate it so very much. You're helping getting that channel off the ground. I'd love to hit 15,000 subs by the end of the year if that's possible, and your support does go a very long way. And as always, speaking of support, a massive thank you goes out to my wonderful supporters over on Patreon. Each and every one of you is helping to continue to make this channel a reality during these somewhat turbulent times, so I do appreciate it all so very much. Alright everyone, until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.